Season 2 Part 1 of Mushoku Tensei was quite the roller coaster of emotions. Nothing could beat the hype I had for it when the first PV trailer of Season 2 was released on July 3rd, 2022, especially after the long interval between the PV and the last episode of Season 1. In retrospect, Studio Bind gave almost no new information for 6 months straight and released whatever this was instead. But finally, Season 2 was upon us. But with a new season of Mushoku Tensei comes a new plot point in the story we follow after the events of Season 1. And no, I am not talking about Rudeus and his sad boy hours or PP dysfunction. The plot I am talking about is Sara, who comes across as a Chinese ripoff of Eris. But is that really all her character has to offer? Let's take a closer look. Quick disclaimer, I'm giving my insight on Sara as a person who has read volumes 1 through 7 of the light novels and everything the anime has released so far. I will be pulling details from the light novels, so anime onlys beware. There's a concept that I believe applies to all the characters in this rich world, something I call the Mushoku Tensei Effect. By this, I mean Rifujin Namaganote, I'm sorry if I butchered your name again, the author of Mushoku Tensei's brilliant way of writing that manifested itself into a concept that applies to the world and its characters. Not just the main characters, but the side characters and background characters as well. Not a single one of them feels out of place or unnecessary, as each of them has motivations and stories of their own to tell. So how does the Mushoku Tensei Effect apply to this snarky blonde-haired girl here? Well, to start, what defines a tsundere? This was something I explained in my Eris analysis video, but I broke it down into 3 simple tropes. Number 1, the tsundere treats the protagonist poorly for seemingly no reason, even if it is their first time meeting. Number 2, the tsundere treats everyone around them relatively well, despite their haughty personality to the protagonist. And number 3, the tsundere will eventually fall hard for the protagonist after they do 1 or 2 basic things, but will still stubbornly refuse their feelings. These 3 general things combine to create the tsundere appeal. Sara fits the bill for nearly all these points, especially the first one. I get that no one likes a gloomy mood killer like Rudeus was on that carriage, but the way she treated him was almost like he killed her family or something. She kept up this attitude despite learning that Rudeus was here to search for his mother, and shut him out at every chance she had when Rudeus was getting a little too close to her safe space. Her safe space being the B-ranked party Counter Arrow. Sara's second tsundere trope applies here in that she treats the members of the Counter Arrow party like family, especially her mentor and metaphorical mother figure, Suzanne. But despite her demeanor towards Rudeus, she too slowly falls into the third trope all tsunderes find themselves in, falling madly in love with the protagonist. But did she really? It's true that she slowly started warming up to him after Rudeus repeatedly proved that he is not as bad as she thinks he is, and even going as far as to offer her body to him, but she never explicitly stated that she loved him. In fact, she did something that would make any tsundere fan proud and completely shut down the protagonist during an important moment, giving them the wrong idea, despite that most likely not being her true feelings. It's also obvious that she did feel something as she was visibly hurt by the words Rudeus said about her, but it's not like she was swooned by Rudeus' strength, as she is fully capable on her own with her proficiency in archery and her independence as an adventurer. But it can't just be me when it felt like something was missing from that last scene in episode 3. There just had to be something more to Sara than just being your average tsundere/Eris wannabe. That is where the light novels come in, to fill in the blanks the anime left unsaid. You see, her hateful attitude towards Rudeus was not fully directed at him, but instead towards his noble origins. She was born in a village at the western edge of the Milbots region, near the middle of the Asura kingdom. She was born to parents who were hunters and grew up helping them from a young age. Due to her father being a hunter, she had been practicing with the bow ever since she was little. However, one day when she was about 10, a massive monster started attacking the village from a nearby forest, to which both of her parents were killed in the process. It was from that fateful day when her hatred for nobility grew. The region she was born from was overseen by a certain rodent-ish name that would immediately raise flags for Sara when she heard it, the Nodos Grey Rat family. Sara also saw the lord of the Nodos Grey Rat family himself when she was very young, as he came to her village alongside a group of soldiers to hunt down some monsters nearby. His crafty-looking face, still vivid in her mind, bore a lot of resemblance to Rudeus. In her eyes, her hometown was destroyed by their arrogance, as they never sent knights to help when the monsters attacked her village. They simply left them to die. To make matters worse, the nobles came up with all kinds of excuses for why they didn't send any knights to protect the village. All of this provides insight into why she despises nobility, and as an extension, Rudeus as well. Simply hearing the fact that Rudeus has a last name, and that last name is tied directly to the cause of her despair, was enough for her to instantly have prejudice against him. After all, nobles are generally distinguishable from the rest with the fact that they have surnames. The name Sara was all her parents could offer her, as they also had single names as well. Orphaned due to the loss of her home, she was taken in by Suzanne and Timothy, who were sent from a nearby town to deal with the onslaught of monsters. At the time, Suzanne and Timothy were in the same party, but with other completely different members. The task of exterminating the plague of monsters that attacked Sara's village proved to be difficult due to their sheer amount of numbers, resulting in a wipeout of all the parties that were sent to exterminate the monsters. Save for Suzanne and Timothy, the rest of their party members were wiped out. Coincidentally, Mimir and Patrice were in a similar situation, and thus, Counter Arrow was formed from the people who survived after the horde of monsters had been dealt with. At this time, Counter Arrow was only a D-ranked party, but as Sara became an adventurer, she significantly helped them raise their rank. As she eventually became an official member, her progression in the skill with the bow rapidly developed, as she presumably had talent for the bow since she was young. Her proficiency with the bow was practically prodigious, as despite being in a group of seasoned veterans, she stood out with her battlefield awareness, agility, and god-tier aim. Her eyes were unsurprisingly sharper than your average adventurer, as shown here when she was tasked with reporting on the number of luster grizzlies in the darkness. In terms of combat, she was already on the level of an A-ranked adventurer. Archers were an uncommon sight in this world, as mages held an advantage with their long reach and more potent spells. Moreover, archers grappled with the constraint of finite arrows and the burden of carrying them, in contrast to a magician who could regain their mana after a good night's sleep. Unlike in video games where you could stockpile thousands in your backpack, reality was different. For most, learning magic far outweighed the bow's limitations. Nonetheless, exceptional skill rendered those drawbacks inconsequential. If a true talent could shoot 5 arrows in the time it took a magician to cast one spell, or consistently achieve critical hits, it would make archery a viable option as an adventurer. Sara was very skilled for her age, in that her raw talent was probably comparable to that of Eris. As bows weren't so popular in that world, she had to craft her own bows and arrows, using whenever free time she had to whittle down wood with her knife. She also had to take advantage of her environment and created bows and arrows out of tree and branches, or even using the abundance of wood sold in Rosenberg, proving just how resourceful and independent she is. Additionally, the earring she wears is actually a magic item that will catch an opponent in an illusion for a short time if the user manages to stab the opponent with the end of the feather. Either way, her continuous progression in her skills separates her from other tsunderes, in that she was definitely no pushover. Despite lacking in general experience, however, her skills as an archer made her a capable adventurer and individual. However, her various experiences as an adventurer led her to encounter people who would further deepen her hatred for nobility. It was typical for children of nobility to run away from their schools or homes after learning a bit more about the outside world and try their hand at adventuring. Sara simply couldn't fathom how, despite being born into such luxurious lives, rich kids would still try to become adventurers while simultaneously dragging those around them into danger. Sara has experienced being on guard duty for rich kids like these a few times, with the majority of them only lasting for a job or two before they got scared and headed home. After all, they're never ready to risk their lives like actual adventurers do every day because they know that they have somewhere to run back to if things get too ugly for them. They never once considered the fact that most adventurers do not have that option, and often are forced to spend the rest of their lives as adventurers. To put it simply, Sara hated them kids.
Fuck them kids, bro.
And she assumed that Rudeus was also another one of those useless brats. Aside from his trauma-inducing last name, she immediately assumed that Rudeus was a rich kid and thus related to nobility based on the expensive-looking staff he carried with him. But even so, why would the son of some Asura noble leave his country and head out to a dangerous region like the Northern Territories of all places? To Sara, the answer was written all over his face, in that despite his polite tone, he always looked forlorn and gloomy. She quickly chalked it up as another rich kid who had some trouble in his rich boarding school or gotten into a fight with his parents. She figured that he would run away if things got even slightly dicey, which is why during their first coalition hunting the Luster Grizzlies, she made an effort to keep his role in the party to a minimum, in an attempt to prevent him from sabotaging the party. This fact proves that she really cares for her party and wouldn't risk having someone she presumes is another one of those spoiled rich kids put their lives in jeopardy. This notion of Sara being conscientious of her actions and always thinking about her party members is a bit more pronounced in the light novel. One example is during their preparation for the Snowdrake Scale Collection quest, she is seen to be worried because her arrows might not be able to pierce their skin, which means that it's hard to tell if she could deal much damage. She was still young, so she hadn't had many serious setbacks yet, and as a result, she looked more concerned about what would happen to the other members of the party if she couldn't play her part. The possibility that she herself was in danger didn't seem to register. The more I read into Volume 7, the more Sara's behavior in the anime began to make sense. Her hatred for nobility was justifiable, and even though Rudeus didn't really act like a noble, he was still one by birth. And to Sara, that was bad enough. She hated rich kids who pretended they were adventurers, and she believed that even children of the nobles would eventually grow up to be as corrupted as their parents. But she hated nobility in general. It was due to their arrogance that her hometown was destroyed. It was their fault her parents were dead and that her village was gone. She hadn't forgotten the despair she felt back then. But despite all of her prejudices, and whether Rudeus realized it or not, he gradually contradicted all of her preconceptions about him. Instead of running for his life as the majority of other kids of nobility would, he wiped out an entire pack of Luster Grizzlies single-handedly, proving that he was a lot stronger than he says he was. And through that first job with him, she realized that he wasn't really a bad person. The story about his missing mother shocked her at first, but she eventually started thinking that it was most likely a lie. She deemed his somber story as a shoddy attempt at proving how different and special he was at being an adventurer in the Northern Territories instead of Asura. But deep down, she knew that Rudeus wasn't lying. If he was, he wouldn't have stood his ground against the Luster Grizzlies with them, and he wouldn't have broken down in the middle of the Adventurers Guild. But her general impression of him didn't change. In her eyes, he was still a cowardly noble boy, despite the immense power he had. This impression of him only changed when she saw him stay back without saying a word to buy them time against the Snowdrakes. Rudeus was definitely strong enough to save himself, but he prioritized getting Counter Arrow out alive. At that moment, she realized that not only was he not a bad person, he was the kind who would sacrifice himself to save others. Seeing such a selfless act from him, she was the first to run back to save him. And if nothing else, Rudeus always treated Timothy and the others with genuine respect, unlike a certain someone.
Oh!
He was an incredible magician, but he never acted like he was too good for them. It's true that Rudeus could be an eyesore because he never stood up for himself and always wore an unsettling fake smile. It's also true that Sara didn't want to admit that he was any different from other rich kids. But the more she looked at Rudeus, the more her foundation about what she really hated seemed unclear to her. From then on, her feelings from him started to change. Sara began to pay attention to what he was saying and doing. She tried to ignore her developing emotions, telling herself that she detested nobles in general, and adventurers born into nobility in particular. However, the denial failed, and she eventually came to the realization that Rudeus was not like the aristocrats she despised after all. Grappling with these confusing feelings, the final straw for her to admit her true feelings was when Rudeus came to save her by himself. Sara finally acknowledged that what she had in her heart was not hatred, but rather affection. Knowing this, she decided to act upon these feelings. I'll take this opportunity to describe a bit more about Sara, how she compares to Eris, and how in many ways she is different from her. Petite, with a crop of smooth, short blonde hair, and a sharp expression to tie everything together, her facial features were classically Asuran. In the light novels, Rudeus points this out and mentions that she resembles Eris. However, other than the unsurprising fact that Sara's open hostility reminded him of Eris, Sara was different from Eris in a number of ways. For one, Sara was pretty particular when it came to paying debts. This could be due to her time as an adventurer and that typically being in debt with someone in that line of work is not the best idea, but the point stands that she is a responsible person. Anytime Rudeus would try to treat her to a meal, she would insist on repaying it back right away. Although Eris was most likely a lot more conscious about the value of money now, she certainly wasn't back in her youth years. Sara also enjoyed minor things like shopping trips and even small talk, albeit most likely only because she was doing it with the person she cared about. Eris, on the other hand, whether she was doing it with the person she likes or not, wasn't too enthused with shopping trips or small talk. Not that she was good with words in the first place. But if there's one thing that Eris and Sara really share in common, is the fact that both of them are very assertive when it comes to getting what they want. In Sara's case, she wasted no time closing the distance between herself and Rudeus. She started inviting him to her party's hangouts and actively engaged in conversation with him. The more they talked, the more her love for him grew. As she got an idea of how Rudeus felt about her, she deduced that he was starting to reciprocate her feelings back to her. This is why she invited him out on a date, resolving herself to make a move and see it through to the end. Sara intended to use her life debt to him as a way to sleep with him since she was too ashamed to express her feelings to him directly. She then made the decision to tell him how she really felt after they had slept together. This is where the slew of misunderstandings began, and unresolved feelings were left hanging. When Sara learned that Rudeus's body didn't react to hers, it felt like a harsh slap in the face. If she wasn't so flustered, she might have been able to notice that Rudeus hadn't intended this to happen. Unfortunately, this was Sara's first time, and she didn't have the composure for that, so all she could do was save face by spitting those words at him and getting out of there. She spent the entire night in tears, but somehow managed to put on a positive front the next day. However, Rudeus didn't show up at their party's usual meeting spot. After asking around, they learned that Soldat had taken him off to some place. She knew that Rudeus did not get along with Soldat, so she worried that he would be in some sort of trouble. But as she and Suzanne traced him down, that was when she saw him. At the entrance to the red light district, hammered, kissing a red-haired escort, and dishing out complaints about her. From what Sara understood at that moment, Rudeus spent the night in the red light district with Soldat, betting a prostitute because Sara wasn't able to satisfy him, and laughed as he dished out insults about her. The affection she had for Rudeus immediately turned into hatred, despite all the indicative hints that would suggest that what she concluded might be wrong. She also certainly had no idea she had a bad habit of lying to herself and ignoring the truth, as we know of her initial struggles in trying to not hate Rudeus in the first place. As Sara was wallowing and shrieking in her fierce resentment for Rudeus, Suzanne and Timothy were there to try and help comfort her and resolve the situation. Timothy pointed out that although Soldat did have a bad attitude and talked trash, there were rumors that Soldat was good at looking after people. It was possible that he was trying to help Rudeus. After a bit of convincing, Sara agreed that she had been too caught up in her sadness to really observe her surroundings that night, and decided to ask him himself. However, after not being able to find him, she asked around until she ended up finding herself in the pleasure district. It was at this moment that Sara learned the truth of the situation. Here, Sara met the woman she saw Rudeus with. Elise, who only knew about Rudeus' struggles and the fact that Sara was one of the main causes of his sorrow, started telling Sara what she knew about Rudeus' circumstances, fully intending to put the blame on her. Sara learned of Rudeus' impotence and just how depressed and frustrated he was about the situation. Now, she was not only weighed down by her own pain, but also by the knowledge that Rudeus had been hurt as well. Despite how sorry she was too scared to go after him. She feared he wouldn't listen. She feared he would push her away. Furthermore, Rudeus leaving town without saying anything to her was a sign of rejection. That night, all she could do was curl up in her bed and lay there. But when the morning came, she was keenly aware of two things. Her love had ended and Rudeus rejected her. She looked up to the rising sun and thought to herself, but if it comes to pass that we meet again, I'd like to apologize and be sincere about it. This harsh realization that Sara came to is something that I believe encapsulates what the Mushoku Tensei Effect does for its characters. Through her time spent with the one known as Rudeus Grey Rat, Sara, a person who has always loathed nobility, found herself wrestling with those feelings. Rudeus could have easily been one of the many foolish and egotistical nobles she had seen countless times before. Throughout her life, she stuck to her guns and held on to her understandable hatred for nobles, and a part of her always wanted to hold on to that hatred for Rudeus. But Sara couldn't deny herself, or the fact that Rudeus was truly different. Realizing this, Sara slowly started to open up her heart, but by the time she fell for him, her love love had ended before it even started. But even so, she not only admitted her missteps, but also reflected on them, and promised to one day make it right. This alone was enough for me to feel how genuine Sara was as a character, and just how the Mushoku Tensei effect impacts his characters. They aren't simply cheap characters that are unoriginal or copied off others. The motivations and reasons they act the way they do feel multidimensional and comprehensible, but that doesn't mean they aren't capable of change and introspection, just like Sara. She isn't a wannabe Eris or your average tsundere. She is her own person. Thank you for watching. I am so glad I managed to make a video on Sara, as I felt it had to be done due to the context that was cut from the anime. Despite putting quite a lot of details in this video, I highly recommend that you read Volume 7 yourself, as there are a lot of small details and dialogue that I couldn't fit into this review. My upload schedule has honestly been inconsistent, but such is life, and I can't be thankful enough for all the support I've been getting from you guys. I'm not sure what I'll make next, but I have some ideas that could be interesting for a video. Look forward to it.